Alexander Pierce stood frozen in the hospital corridor, his heart pounding so hard that he could hear its thunder inside his ears. Time seemed to stretch and distort. The doctor's lips moved, but the words refused to make sense. The neon lights flickered above, their constant buzz droning into his mind as he clung to one impossible hope. Everything around him felt like it was trembling. A nurse walked by with hurried steps, and another pushed a gurney down the hall. The smell of disinfectant swirled around Alexander like a suffocating cloud. His palms were clammy, and every muscle in his body ached from tension. He had been confident. He had arrived at the hospital that evening expecting to hold his child for the first time. His wife, Melissa, had gone into labor ahead of schedule, but the doctors had assured him it was going to be fine. He had believed them. Melissa had been strong, filled with energy and excitement about this new chapter in their life. Yet now, something had gone terribly wrong. She was not in recovery. Their child was not being wheeled out in a cozy blanket. The doctor looked at Alexander with compassion in his eyes, and time stilled for a second. Then he uttered words that punched through Alexander like a hammer. "I am very sorry, Mr. Pierce, we couldn't save them." Alexander's knees buckled, and he pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself. Both his wife and his newborn son were gone. The world stopped making sense. His vision blurred with tears, and he bit his lips so hard he tasted blood. The nurse by his side guided him to a chair. She was speaking in soft, comforting tones, but all he could hear was the echo of finality. His wife Melissa was dead, and so was the child he had never even held. Everything he once considered important, this international business deals, his massive properties, and his prestigious reputation crumbled in value that very second. None of it mattered if he had no one to share life with. Alexander, a billionaire who had everything money could buy, had lost the two people who could never be replaced. He shut his eyes, wishing for some cosmic force to reverse time, but the doctor's solemn expression reminded him there was no turning back. He heard people crying, footsteps echoing on the polished floor, and the beep of distant machines. Yet, none of it reached him. He was trapped in a black hole of grief. Hey everyone! Thank you so much for all your love and support. It truly means a lot that you take the time to watch my content. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to like and comment. I want to hear from you. Alexander's mind spiraled backward to the moment he had first proposed to Melissa. That bright day when she said yes, her laughter dancing in the summer breeze. He recalled their wedding under a canopy of white roses. Her warm smile had lit up the entire ceremony. Then, the exciting news of her pregnancy, the gentle swell of her belly, the countless bedtime stories they had read to the unborn baby, everything was now wrapped in silence. He crumbled in the chair, shoulders shaking from the force of his sobs. He felt so alone that night, more alone than he had ever felt in his life. He could not stop imagining Melissa's face in her final moment, nor could he stop picturing the baby's tiny fingers that he would never touch. He sat there in that chair for what seemed like hours. Doctors and nurses passed him, giving him sympathetic looks. Finally, someone in scrubs quietly led him to a private room and handed him a small envelope with his wife's wedding ring and the hospital tag that bore the name of his son. Alexander stared at those items. The ring still felt warm, as if Melissa had just been wearing it. He slowly slid it onto his own finger, ignoring the fact that it fit only halfway. He lowered his eyes to the floor, wishing to vanish. He felt like a man whose soul had been yanked from his body. He was hollow now, as though nothing inside him was alive. He didn't want to speak. He didn't want to move. He just wanted to sink into that chair and wake up from this nightmare. Yet the nightmare was real. No words could reshape the situation. No money could buy back the precious lives he had lost. His grief wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, pulling him deeper into numbness. That moment was the darkest of his life. The billionaire had lost the two most cherished people he would ever know. It was only a month ago, when Alexander had taken Melissa on a short trip to the countryside for some peace. Work had been hectic, but he finally cleared his schedule because Melissa had asked him for a romantic escape before the baby arrived. They had strolled through meadows, dotted with wildflowers, and shared laughter. Alexander remembered the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at him, so full of trust and joy. They talked about the future, imagining how they would raise their child with love and care. He held her hand, believing they had all the time in the world. At that time, Alexander's business empire was thriving. Phone calls poured in around the clock. He had ongoing contracts to sign and crucial meetings to attend. But for once, he had chosen to focus on Melissa. She used to joke that he was married to his phone, and he always teased her back that his heart belonged only to her. Little did he know that in a few short weeks, she would no longer be by his side. The very next day after the trip, he had flown off for a business meeting in another city, leaving Melissa in the care of her mother. He had promised to be back soon, but life had other plans. Melissa's pregnancy was not supposed to be complicated. She was young, healthy, and strong. Yet, the unexpected happened, and preterm labor struck with a force that nobody saw coming. By the time she reached the hospital, the doctors discovered severe complications. Alexander, stuck in a meeting he had considered vital to his business, didn't realize the gravity until it was too late. He rushed back, but it took hours. His private jet landed him close to midnight. Looking back, he found himself drowning in what-ifs. These thoughts haunted him like shadows. He knew rationally that he couldn't have changed certain events, but his heart refused to let go of the guilt. He imagined Melissa frightened and alone. He pictured her calling his name during those last moments. His father, an old businessman with silver hair and a rough voice, tried to tell him that no one could predict such a tragedy. But Alexander couldn't accept comfort. He isolated himself, refusing calls and shutting himself in his penthouse for days on end. The once lively place felt like a mausoleum. The curtains were drawn. The silence roared. The staff tiptoed around, unsure of how to help. They left meals outside his bedroom door, which remained mostly untouched. He stared at the ceiling at night, feeling cold sheets beside him where Melissa once lay. He thought of his unborn child's nursery, a sweet room with pale yellow walls, plush animal toys, and a rocking chair where Melissa had spent long afternoons reading baby books. Now, that room stood vacant, every inch of it reminding him of a future that would never happen. The newspapers printed stories of the tragedy, always with a sensational twist. Billionaire business tycoon mourns loss of wife and unborn heir. Some even speculated about lawsuits or medical errors. Others tried to paint a romantic tragedy of epic proportions, with bold headlines and dramatic pictures. None of it captured the reality of Alexander's sorrow. He began to despise the press, wanting only to be left alone. Even in this dark time, life forced him to move forward in small steps. He had a company to oversee, employees who depended on him, and share prices that fluctuated daily. Some in his corporate circle whispered that maybe he should step down for a while. Others grew anxious about the future of Pierce Enterprises without its fearless leader at the helm. But Alexander found himself numb to it all. He felt trapped in the aftermath of a storm, searching for any piece of hope to cling to. Around the same time that Alexander's world was falling apart, across the city, a woman named Clara Evans was crying in a small, cluttered living room. She had just received the news that her husband John had died in a sudden car accident on his way home from a late shift. The police officer had delivered the message gently, but the shock had slammed into Clara like a head-on collision. She stood by the doorway of her old apartment, tears streaming as she stared at the officer's sympathetic face. Then she shut the door, slid down to the floor, and let out a silent scream of pain. She and John had been married for 3 years. Their marriage was humble but filled with genuine love. They had no grand estate, no flashy cars, no trust funds. What they had was each other's unwavering support. John worked as a mechanic, often working extra shifts to provide for them. Clara was employed at a local bakery, waking up early to prepare dough and greet customers with a smile. They dreamed of saving enough money to one day buy a little house in a quiet neighborhood, maybe with a backyard for barbecues and a small garden. All those hopes were shattered in one phone call. For days, Clara could barely function. She had to call her boss at the bakery to explain the tragedy. Her co-workers sent flowers and cards, but nothing seemed real. The last words John had said to her that morning were, "I love you. I'll be home before midnight." Clara felt deserted, as if part of her soul had been stripped away and lost. She cried so much that her eyes were red and swollen. She stared at the empty side of the bed, still unmade, and she buried her face in the pillow that smelled faintly of John. Then came the funeral. It was small, with just a handful of people, mostly relatives and close friends. Clara stood by John's casket, tears dropping onto her black dress. She kept waiting for him to walk through the door, to say, "Hey guys, there's been some big mistake." But reality never twisted that way. She was alone, or so she thought. Just a week later, Clara began to feel strange. She noticed she was extra tired and had bouts of nausea in the morning. At first, she dismissed it as grief, but an instinct nagged at her. She bought a pregnancy test from the local drugstore, and in that cramped bathroom, she saw 2 pink lines appear. Her hands trembled. She sank to the floor, tears of confusion streaming down her cheeks. She was pregnant with John's child, and he was gone. Her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. There was a spark of joy at the idea of carrying John's baby, a small piece of him still alive within her. But the shadow of reality loomed large. She had lost her husband, and she had almost no savings. She lived in a modest apartment with basic furniture. How would she raise a child alone? The fear and uncertainty weighed her down. Despite everything, Clara decided she would carry on. She had to, for the baby's sake. She tried to focus on the new life growing inside her, telling herself that this was her purpose now. She felt John's presence in every corner of their home. She whispered to the baby each morning, hoping somehow John could hear her. She also began working extra hours, though her boss worried about her pushing herself too hard. She was determined to save whatever she could and move forward. 3 months crawled by. Alexander Pierce was back in his office at Pierce Enterprises, though he operated more like a silent figurehead than the confident leader he once was. On the outside, he still wore expensive suits and carried himself with an air of stoicism. But inside, he felt hollow. Some days, he locked his office door, canceled meetings, and stared out the window at the city skyline. His father, Charles Pierce, had stepped in to handle many of the day-to-day affairs. Charles worried about his son but understood that grief was a winding road. Still, the business had obligations, and there were critical tasks Alexander had to sign off on. That was how Alexander ended up crossing paths with Clara Evans. She was at the building that day to submit a job application, though it was for a lower-level position in the shipping department of Pierce Enterprises, a job that matched her modest work experience. She needed a better income than what the bakery provided, and one of her old acquaintances mentioned an opening. Her heart pounded as she rode the elevator to the 10th floor. She had never been this high up in a building before, and everything felt large and imposing. Clara, now 3 months pregnant, wore a slightly loose blouse to hide her small bump. She clutched her resume in a thin folder, hoping no one would notice her trembling. When she stepped into the waiting area, she saw tall glass walls, immaculate floors, and stylish furniture. It made her feel very small. Nonetheless, she was determined to present herself well. She needed the job desperately. By pure chance, Alexander emerged from a meeting and walked down that corridor. He glanced at Clara, noticing her anxious posture. She looked out of place, as if she were in a world far beyond her comfort zone. He paused, a flicker of empathy crossing his face. In his old life, he might have walked past without a second thought, busy, preoccupied, or simply unconcerned. But grief had changed him. He found himself attuned to other people's pain. He approached her, or rather, he slowed down to meet her gaze. She stood up, startled. She wasn't sure who this tall, solemn man was, but his presence felt overwhelming. "Are you here for an interview?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, I'm applying for a position in shipping." He nodded in return. "I see. Good luck." His voice had a somber gentleness. He turned and walked away, leaving Clara wondering who he was. Shortly after, Clara had her interview. It went smoothly. She was honest about her background, her willingness to learn, and her dedication. It also helped that they needed someone reliable and quick to adapt. Clara left with a hopeful smile, although she couldn't shake the memory of that man's face. She didn't know he was the Alexander Pierce, the billionaire owner of the entire company. A few days later, Clara received a phone call. She got the job. She was thrilled, and for the first time since John's death, a small spark of optimism lit up her life. She spent a week preparing, buying suitable outfits, brushing up on computer basics, and trying to look and act professional. The morning of her first day, she felt butterflies in her stomach. She arrived early, introduced herself to the shipping department staff, and got started with her tasks. Her co-workers found her sweet and helpful. She quickly learned how to file paperwork, track shipments, and manage the department's inbox. Everything seemed to be going well. By the end of her shift, she was tired but proud of herself. As she stepped into the elevator to leave, the doors opened on a top floor by mistake. Someone must have pressed the wrong button earlier. The large glass hallway was quiet. In that single moment, she saw Alexander Pierce standing by a large window, staring at the city lights. Something passed between them in that instant, a shared sadness, though neither knew why. Clara awkwardly pressed the button for the ground floor, and the doors slid shut, leaving her alone with questions swirling in her mind. Over the next few weeks, Clara settled into her role. She did her best to maintain a positive attitude and prove herself, yet each day brought new challenges. The work was more demanding than she had expected, and she was still dealing with waves of grief. Sometimes, her emotions overwhelmed her, and she had to rush to the restroom to cry in private. Other times, she found solace in focusing on tasks, letting the routine numb her pain. Through it all, she never forgot the life inside her. She felt her baby's gentle flutters each evening, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. One afternoon, while Clara was carrying a stack of documents, she nearly bumped into Alexander in the hallway. He was accompanied by a few board members who seemed to be in a serious conversation. Clara apologized quickly. Stepping aside, Alexander paused, told the board members to continue without him. She noticed his eyes were distant, but his concern seemed genuine. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just a little busy." He nodded. "Working in shipping?" She blinked in surprise that he even remembered. "Yes, it's my first month." Alexander slipped his hands into his pockets, looking uncertain for a moment. "How are you finding it so far?" Clara hesitated, then answered honestly, "It's good. Everyone's helpful. It's a change of pace for me, but I need the stability." He looked at her with a softness in his gaze. "I hope you find it here." They parted ways, and Clara could not help noticing how sad he appeared. This time, she recognized him from company news articles. Alexander Pierce, the billionaire CEO with a tragic story. Rumor had it that his wife and baby had died not long ago. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Clara's heart tightened. She too had lost someone. A few days later, she was working late to finish an urgent shipment report. Most people had already gone home, and the building was quiet. She heard footsteps and turned to find Alexander approaching her desk. He gave her a polite nod. "You're here late," he noted. Clara smiled weakly. "Yes, I'm trying to finish this before tomorrow morning." He glanced at her workspace. "Need any help?" She was taken aback. Why would someone like him offer help with something so basic? Yet she saw sincerity in his eyes. "I think I can handle it, but thank you." He nodded again, lingering for a moment as if searching for words. Finally, he said, "If you ever need anything, resources, a quiet space to think, let me know." Clara wondered if he treated all employees this kindly, or if there was some other reason. She was too shy to ask. She simply responded with a soft, "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." When he turned to leave, she found herself calling out, "Mr. Pierce, I'm sorry for your loss." She hadn't planned to say it, but the words slipped out. He stopped in his tracks, shoulders tensing. Slowly, he turned around, and for a long moment, he just stared at her. "Thank you," he finally said, voice thick with emotion. Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The next morning, Clara regretted speaking so personally. She worried she had crossed a line. Yet, something inside her felt relieved. She had wanted him to know she understood. She had endured her own sorrow and recognized that same deep pain in his eyes. But she also knew that every person's grief was unique, and she hoped she hadn't overstepped. Alexander, on the other hand, was deeply moved by Clara's words. Hardly anyone at work spoke to him about Melissa and the baby anymore. They either tiptoed around the topic or avoided it altogether, fearing to reopen wounds. But in that simple expression of sympathy, Clara had shown him a raw understanding he didn't expect. Her eyes, filled with empathy, had told him she wasn't just offering empty condolences. She knew what it meant to lose someone dear. In the days that followed, Alexander found small reasons to check on the shipping department. Sometimes he would drop by with a question about an upcoming contract. Other times he merely passed by Clara's desk to say a casual hello. Clara felt a strange pull toward him as well. It wasn't romancy, at least, not at first. She felt safer in his presence, knowing he wouldn't judge her tears or her occasional moments of quiet sadness. One afternoon, Clara had a dizzy spell while reviewing some shipping invoices. She gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady herself. A coworker quickly caught her arm. Alexander happened to be walking by, and he rushed over, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Clara forced a small nod, her vision clearing. "I'm fine, just dizzy." Her coworker suggested she go home and rest. Alexander agreed. "Yes, please take the rest of the day off. Your health is more important." Clara hesitated. She needed the hours, and she was terrified of losing this job. "Thank you," she whispered, gathering her bag and heading for the elevator. As she left, Alexander couldn't ignore the sudden wave of protectiveness he felt. He remembered those days when Melissa was pregnant, and how he had tried to ensure she rested. He didn't know Clara's situation, but he had a hunch something more was going on with her. Maybe she had hidden burdens. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to help. Clara went to the doctor that evening for a routine prenatal checkup. Thankfully, everything was normal. The doctor advised her to take better care of herself, eat properly, and avoid stress. Clara sighed, thinking how hard that was when she was a grieving widow with a new job. but she resolved to be more careful for the baby's sake. About a month later, Clara's pregnancy bump was harder to hide. She wasn't showing a great deal yet, but her clothes fit snugly, and mornings were marked by frequent nausea. She used looser outfits and tried to avoid drawing attention to herself. She feared that if her bosses realized she was expecting, she might lose the job before her probation period ended. Yet rumors started swirling in the shipping department. A coworker caught sight of her in the restroom one morning, looking pale. Another noticed she never joined in coffee runs, often sticking to water and crackers. Before long, gossip spread that Clara might be pregnant. Some looked at her with pity, others whispered behind her back. Alexander caught wind of the rumors through the grapevine. Initially, he said nothing. It wasn't his place to pry, but an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. He recalled her dizzy spell, her quiet demeanor, and the look in her eyes that spoke of deeper sorrow. One late afternoon, he found her alone at her desk and decided to approach. "May I speak with you in my office?" he asked. Clara's heart began to race. She followed him up to the executive floor, stepping into the spacious office with its floor-to-ceiling windows. She felt out of place standing before the enormous desk. Alexander gestured for her to sit on a sofa in a corner of the room. He took a seat across from her, hands resting on his knees. "I've heard some talk," he began gently, "that you might be pregnant. Are you?" Clara's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She looked down, twisting her fingers together. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Yes, I am." Alexander inhaled slowly, trying to hide his sudden rush of concern. "Why didn't you let us know? We could have made accommodations." Clara swallowed. "I was afraid. Afraid I'd lose my job. I really need it, and I know I'm still new here." He nodded in understanding. "This company doesn't terminate employees for being pregnant, Clara. But I do wish you had come to us. Are you alone in this?" Tears pricked the corners of her eyes as she thought of John. She felt a lump in her throat. "My husband died. I only found out about the baby after he was gone." Alexander felt his chest tighten. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning every word. "I know how it feels to lose someone you love." She wiped her eyes. "I've had some tough times, but I'm doing my best for my baby. This job is my lifeline." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "You have my word you're not going to lose your job." He paused for a moment, then spoke more softly. "I lost my wife and our unborn child not so long ago. It's still unbearable sometimes. But maybe we can help each other in some way." Clara was stunned by his openness. She had heard the story, but hearing him speak about it made it real. She felt her own grief rise up, and for a moment they sat in silence, sharing a bond that needed no further explanation. From that day on, Alexander made sure Clara had what she needed at work-lighter duties: a comfortable chair, flexible hours if needed. He asked HR to ensure she was aware of any maternity benefits. He never pried into her personal life beyond what she was willing to share, but his steady support eased Clara's worries. She felt a sense of relief, knowing she wouldn't be alone. In time, small friendly conversations grew between them. Clara found herself opening up about John, sharing how they had met at a small-town fair. She told Alexander about the red balloon John had bought her, how he had teased her for being afraid of the Ferris wheel. In return, Alexander told her about Melissa, how he'd first seen her at a charity gala. He described Melissa's laughter and her kindness. Their stories were told with tears, but also with a sense of warmth, as if speaking them out loud brought each lost spouse back to life for a few moments. One evening, Clara was working late again, but this time Alexander insisted on driving her home. She refused at first, not wanting to burden him. During the ride, she felt self-conscious sitting in his sleek black sedan. He drove quietly, but after a while he asked, "How far along are you now?" "About 5 months," Clara answered. I've been reading all these books about pregnancy. It's a little scary, but I want to be ready. Alexander nodded. You'll do fine. You seem very strong. She gave a weak laugh. Sometimes I feel like I'm about to break. This baby is all I have left of John. He glanced at her with understanding. I lost my child before I could meet him, he said, voice trembling slightly. I won't pretend to know what it's like to still carry that life inside you, but I do know the importance of that child. It's a piece of someone you love. She nodded, her eyes misting. When they arrived at her apartment, she thanked him quietly and slipped out of the car. He watched her climb the steps and disappear inside, feeling an ache in his heart. He thought back to the moment in the hospital corridor's entire life, changed in a single instant. Now, he was faced with the reality of Clara's pregnancy, a living reminder of hope in the face of loss. Part of him felt drawn to protect her. Another part feared he might be stepping into complicated emotions he wasn't ready for. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's belly grew. She felt the baby kick for the first time while sitting at her desk one afternoon. The sensation was both astonishing and comforting. She placed a hand on her stomach, smiling to herself. It reminded her that life could still move forward. Around that time, her coworkers began to shower her with small acts of kindness. Someone brought her a footrest. Another gave her some tips on healthy snacks. Their goodwill made the shipping floor a little more cheerful. Alexander continued to offer quiet support. He never pushed her to talk about her grief, but he made sure she knew his door was always open. Sometimes, she found herself stopping by his office with a question, only to linger, sipping the tea he offered, chatting about everything and nothing. These talks became a balm for both of them. Alexander found a sliver of peace in these gentle, shared moments. They weren't about business deals or corporate strategies. They were about two hearts trying to heal. One day, Clara mentioned needing a safe car seat and a crib. She had been searching online but found them expensive. She was trying to manage her finances carefully. Alexander listened, recalling the brand-new nursery in his penthouse never used, a heartbreaking reminder of what he lost. Without warning her, Alexander arranged for a delivery, had a crib, a set of baby clothes, and essential items sent to her apartment. When Clara discovered the packages at her doorstep, she was overwhelmed. Each carefully chosen item spelled out care and compassion. She wanted to refuse it, didn't want to feel like a charity case, but she also realized it would greatly help her. She called him with tears in her voice. I don't know what to say. This is too much, she whispered. He spoke gently. It's not too much. It's what I can do to help a friend. She paused. Thank you, Alexander, she said, using his first name for the first time. Summer turned into autumn, and the leaves changed color. Clara's due date approached, and her belly grew rounder. She walked more slowly and started working fewer hours. Alexander insisted she take more breaks. She worried about money, but he reminded her that she had maternity leave benefits and that her job was secure. Still, she found her anxiety rising as the final weeks drew near. She feared going into labor alone. She dreaded coming home to an empty apartment with a newborn she didn't fully know how to care for. Alexander sensed her fear, though she tried to hide it. He offered to pay for a professional caregiver if she needed extra help after the birth. But Clara felt uneasy about accepting so many of his gifts. She was grateful but also proud. She didn't want him to feel sorry for her. Alexander understood her hesitation and tried to be respectful. Still, he couldn't help wanting to make things easier for her. In a small way, he felt like he was honoring Melissa's memory by showing kindness to Clara. As the weeks passed, their conversations deepened. They spoke about faith, hope, and the fragility of life. Clara asked him why he never seemed to date anyone, and he admitted he couldn't bear the thought of being close to another woman since Melissa's death. Clara understood the feeling of being trapped between the past and the present. She thought she might never love again. Yet, life kept moving forward, bringing them closer in the process. One evening, Alexander invited Clara to dinner at a quiet restaurant, more of a friendly gesture than a romantic one. She accepted, seeing it as a chance to unwind and talk outside the sterile walls of the office. They sat near a window, sharing a warm meal while the world bustled outside. Alexander asked her about baby names, and she shyly admitted she had been thinking of naming the child Emily, if it was a girl, after John's father. Alexander listened intently, smiling at her stories of John's childhood. He offered his own memories of how he and Melissa had spent hours choosing a name for their unborn son. They had finally decided on Henry, after Melissa's grandfather. The conversation was tinged with sadness, but also with acceptance. By the end of dinner, they shared a comforting silence. Each realized how far they had come from the darkest days of their grief. As Clara's due date loomed closer, her co-workers threw a small baby shower at the office. They decorated a corner of the shipping department with pastel balloons and a banner that read, "Welcome, baby." Clara was touched to receive small gifts: diapers, blankets, baby bottles. Alexander attended briefly, standing in the background with a gentle smile. She caught his eye and gave him a grateful nod. That night, Clara found herself crying in her apartment. She thought of John, wishing he could have been there, imagining how he would have teased her about all the cute baby items. She felt guilty for moving forward, even though she knew life demanded it. She thought of Alexander and the complicated feelings that were growing inside her. She valued his friendship, but was she starting to feel something more? The question both scared and comforted her. Alexander, meanwhile, wrestled with his own emotions. He caught himself thinking about Clara at odd times, wondering if she was resting well, if she had enough to eat, if she felt lonely. He tried to maintain a boundary in his mind, reminding himself that she was still grieving and pregnant with her late husband's child. But he also couldn't ignore that she filled a void in his life. Her presence, gentle and warm, soothed his broken heart. He hadn't planned on feeling close to anyone, yet here he was, checking his phone late at night in case she needed something. 3 weeks before Clara's due date, the company threw a charity gala, an annual event that Melissa had helped organize when she was alive. Alexander debated canceling it, too haunted by memories. But the philanthropic commitments were large, and the event had already been scheduled. He decided to attend to honor Melissa. Clara was invited as a staff member, though she felt shy attending such a grand function. She worried about her big belly and her modest dress, but with some encouragement, she decided to go. On the night of the charity gala, Clara arrived feeling a mixture of excitement and insecurity. She wore a simple, flowing navy blue gown that allowed room for her baby bump. She had pinned her hair up, and though she wore minimal makeup, she looked elegant. As she entered the grand ballroom, she felt overwhelmed by the sparkling chandeliers, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the sight of wealthy donors dressed in designer outfits. It was a world far from her own. Alexander spotted her from across the room. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo, looking every bit the powerful CEO. Yet, behind his composed exterior, he felt a wave of emotion. This gala was a vivid reminder of Melissa, who once stood beside him, charming guests with her bright smile. He took a deep breath and made his way to Clara, gently guiding her away from the crowded dance floor to a quieter corner. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes kind. "Thank you," she replied, her cheeks warming. "This place is incredible and a bit intimidating." He offered a reassuring smile. "I know. Melissa always handled these events with grace. I'm just muddling through." Clara reached out, giving his hand a light squeeze. "She would be proud of you." He managed a small nod, trying to steady the ache in his chest. "Thank you." They spent the evening chatting with guests, some of whom recognized Clara as Alexander's new friend. A few were curious, but Alexander's protective manner kept their questions gentle. Throughout the night, he found his gaze drifting to Clara's baby bump. It reminded him so vividly of what he had lost, yet he felt no jealousy or regret toward her. Instead, he felt drawn to the miracle of a new life. Near the end of the evening, there was a tribute to Melissa. A short video played, showing her at past charity events, hugging children at orphanages, and speaking with passion. Alexander stood by Clara, tears gathering in his eyes as Melissa's voice echoed in the ballroom. Clara placed a comforting hand on his arm. A wave of shared grief and comfort passed between them. The guests gave a standing ovation. For Alexander, it was a moment of both heartbreak and solace, a reminder of how beautiful Melissa had been and how her light still lingered in the things she cared about. As the gala ended and guests began leaving, the sky unleashed a sudden downpour. Clara had come by taxi, and she lingered in the entrance, staring at the rain pounding on the pavement. Alexander found her, offering to drive her home. She agreed, grateful. Halfway to Clara's apartment, the car's tires slipped on a patch of standing water, causing Alexander's heart to race. He steadied the vehicle, but the scare left them both a bit shaken. "I'm sorry," he murmured, gripping the wheel tightly. "It's okay," Clara said, placing a hand over her belly protectively. Alexander finally exhaled when they reached her building. He turned off the engine and looked at her, rain beating on the roof. Clara nodded, rummaging for her keys. They dashed through the downpour, getting soaked. By the time they reached her apartment door, both were dripping. Clara fumbled to unlock the door. Inside, she flicked on a lamp that cast a warm glow on the worn furniture. She apologized for the mess, hastily pushing aside some baby items. Alexander glanced around, noticing how tiny the space was. "Thank you for letting me walk you up," he said softly. "Are you going to be okay tonight?" She nodded, smiling through her damp hair. "Yes, I'm fine. It's nice to have some company for a few minutes." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like me to stay until the storm eases?" She considered it. Part of her worried about impropriety. Another part of her longed for someone's presence. They settled on the small couch, listening to the rain outside. Clara made them some tea, apologizing that she only had chamomile. Eventually, the conversation turned to the baby. Clara felt the baby kick, and on an impulse, she placed Alexander's hand on her belly. He froze at first, then felt the faint movement under his palm. A rush of emotion flooded him, astonishment, sorrow, and a fragile hope all at once. "That's amazing," he whispered, voice trembling. Clara smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "It is, isn't it?" In that quiet, rain-soaked apartment, they shared a moment of closeness that words couldn't quite describe. Neither was thinking about romance in the usual sense, but they both felt a gentle bond that was more than friendship. It was a connection forged by heartbreak and softened by compassion. Over the next couple of weeks, Alexander grew more involved in Clara's preparations. He offered to hire a part-time helper once the baby was born, or at least cover the cost for a few weeks. Clara, though hesitant, finally relented when she realized how beneficial it would be, especially right after giving birth. Alexander arranged interviews with a few postpartum doulas, and together they selected a kind-faced woman named Helena. Helena specialized in newborn care and emotional support for new mothers. Clara felt uneasy about accepting so much help, but Alexander insisted. "I couldn't be there for Melissa," he said one day with a voice heavy with regret. "Please let me do this. It gives me some peace." Clara felt tears fill her eyes. She placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can't repay you." He simply shook his head. "You don't have to." Meanwhile, at the office, Alexander began to show renewed interest in the charitable projects that Melissa had once managed. He spoke with the philanthropic department, and Clara sometimes helped with small tasks there. She discovered a new side to him, someone who cared deeply about making a positive impact on society. The more she saw of him, the more she admired him, not just as a CEO, but as a caring soul. Clara's co-workers teased her occasionally, suggesting the boss was more than a friend. She blushed, denying any romantic angle. Yet she couldn't dismiss the warmth that blossomed in her heart whenever Alexander was around. He was kind, protective, and scarred, just like her. She found it hard not to care about him. As her due date neared, Clara grew nervous. She had no family in the city her parents had passed years ago, and John's mother lived across the country and couldn't travel easily. Clara feared going into labor alone at night. Alexander noticed her anxiety and quietly assured her that he would make sure she wasn't abandoned. He gave her his private phone number and insisted she call any time, day or night, if something happened. She thanked him, biting her lip to hold back tears. Finally, the day arrived, though it was actually night. Clara had stayed late at work, finishing some pending tasks. Around midnight, a sharp pain tore through her abdomen. She gasped, realizing it might be contractions. She tried to calm herself, timing the pains as best she could. When they became more frequent, she remembered Alexander's instructions. She dialed his number with trembling fingers. He answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the late hour. "Alexander," she said, panting slightly, "I think it's time. The baby. I'm having contractions." He was already up, grabbing his car keys. "I'm on my way. Hang in there." Within 20 minutes, he was at her doorstep, helping her down the stairs and into his car. She clung to his arm, sweating, fear etched on her face. He drove with measured calm, reassuring her between contractions. "You'll be okay," he murmured. "We're almost there." At the hospital, nurses rushed to assist Clara into a wheelchair. Alexander stayed by her side, speaking with the doctors, providing her insurance details, and explaining she was an employee at his company. They quickly admitted her to a delivery room. Clara was scared, her body shaking from pain and anxiety. Alexander held her hand, ignoring the odd looks from the medical staff. He didn't care about appearances. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, medical staff coming and going, and monitors beeping. Clara labored with gasps and moans, the pain stabbing through her. She cried, calling out for John in her delirium, and Alexander soothed her with encouraging words, letting her grip his hand so tight his knuckles turned white. Dawn broke as the final moments of labor approached. Clara summoned every ounce of strength, pushing with fierce determination. At last, a loud, piercing cry filled the room. The doctor announced, "It's a girl," and gently placed the tiny, wriggling newborn on Clara's chest. Clara sobbed with relief, exhaustion, and joy. She gazed at her daughter's scrunched-up face, disbelief and gratitude flooding her. The child she had feared to bring into this world alone was finally here. Alexander stood by, tears trailing down his cheeks. He felt an inexplicable mix of elation and sorrow. The sight of this newborn reminded him of all he lost, but also held a promise of new beginnings. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking. After the birth, Clara was moved to a recovery room. The baby, named Emily, was given a clean bill of health. Clara felt a deep ache in her body, but her heart was full as she cradled her daughter. She was also amazed and grateful to see Alexander still there, looking just as tired and relieved as she was. He had stayed throughout the entire ordeal, never leaving her side. When a nurse came in, She assumed Alexander was the father. Clara started to correct her, but Alexander gently rested a hand on her arm, giving a small shake of his head. "It's okay," he told the nurse. Clara saw no judgment in his eyes, only warmth. Later, though, when they were alone, Alexander looked at the sleeping newborn in Clara's arms. A quiet moment passed between them. "I don't want to overstep," he said slowly, "but if you ever need someone to be there for Emily, I'm here." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "I appreciate that. I just don't want you to feel obligated. You've already done so much." Alexander shook his head. "It's not obligation. It's something I want. You've given me a glimpse of hope that I never thought I'd have again." "Would it be too forward if I said I care about you, Clara?" She looked into his eyes, seeing his sincerity. "I care about you too, but I'm afraid. I'm still grieving John, and you're still grieving Melissa." He nodded, tears shimmering in his gaze. "I know, and I don't want to rush anything. But caring for someone loving someone again doesn't mean we forget. It means we choose to move forward while keeping their memory alive." Clara's heart pounded. She lowered her eyes to Emily's sleeping face. She thought of John and how he would want her to be happy. Maybe love didn't have to come wrapped in guilt. Maybe it could be a gentle path to healing. Over the next few weeks, Clara leaned on Helena, the postpartum doula Alexander had hired. Helena was a godsend, guiding Clara through feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. But Alexander, too, became a regular presence, dropping by after work to check on them, sometimes bringing food or supplies. He even learned how to hold Emily properly, supporting her tiny head. Though not officially her father, Alexander found himself doing fatherly things. He soothed Emily's cries with gentle rocking. He joked about wanting to sign her up for karate lessons in the future. Clara laughed at his silly remarks, the tension of new motherhood easing whenever he was around. Helena watched the two with a knowing smile. She could see the unspoken bond between them grow stronger each day. Of course, there were moments of doubt. Clara worried she was betraying John's memory. She also worried that Emily would grow up confused about who Alexander was in her life. Alexander worried he might fail them, or that his grief would overshadow any happiness he could bring. Yet each time fear bubbled up, they turned to each other for reassurance. Day by day, trust took root, watered by empathy and shared care for Emily. One afternoon, Alexander invited Clara and Emily to his penthouse. She had never been there, and she was nervous. The elevator opened into a luxurious living space with a sweeping view of the city. The decor was tasteful, yet there was a lingering emptiness, as though the place had been neglected. A nursery lay untouched behind closed doors, holding items Melissa had lovingly picked out. When Clara stepped into that nursery, she felt the weight of tragedy hovering in the air. A crib stood in one corner, still made up with soft blue bedding. A mobile of little stars hung above, motionless. The walls were painted in a serene shade of light blue. Clara gently touched one of the stuffed animals, imagining how different this room would have been if Melissa and the baby had survived. Alexander stood behind her, silent. She turned, her eyes brimming with empathy. "Are you sure you want to keep this room as it is?" she asked softly. He looked around, face etched with sorrow. "I couldn't bring myself to pack it up. It felt like I'd be erasing them." Clara placed a hand over his. "I understand. But sometimes change can help us move forward. We can keep their memory without living in a place that hurts us every day." Alexander swallowed hard. "Would you help me? Maybe we could repurpose this room?" "Not right away." She gave a gentle nod. "Whenever you're ready." They left the nursery and sat together in the living room, with Emily sleeping in a portable bassinet. The conversation turned to simpler things-sure progress at work. Emily's next doctor appointment, the new philanthropic project for single mothers that Alexander was planning. He found inspiration in Clara's resilience and wanted to create a program offering job training and support for widowed or single mothers. She lit up at the idea, praising him for wanting to make a difference. He shrugged, a hint of a smile on his lips. Melissa would have wanted it, and you showed me how powerful hope can be. Before Clara left that day, Alexander handed her a small box. Inside was a locket with a tiny photo of John on one side and a photo of baby Emily on the other. Clara stared, tears filling her eyes at the thoughtful gesture. "I hope this helps you feel they're always close," he said quietly. She hugged him, her tears soaking into his shoulder. It was the first time she felt the barrier of grief between them soften into something warm, comforting, and undeniably real. Yet emotions never follow a straight line. A few days later, an old friend of John's came to visit Clara. He voiced his concerns about how quickly Clara seemed to be leaning on Alexander. He worried she was letting a rich man sweep her away without dealing properly with John's memory. Clara felt defensive. She tried to explain that Alexander was a friend, not someone trying to replace John. But doubt festered in her mind. Was she moving too fast? That same evening, while feeding Emily, Clara felt a sudden rush of guilt. She was grateful for Alexander's help and care, but did it mean she was betraying John? The question tormented her. She spent a sleepless night, tears falling on Emily's tiny head. She recalled her wedding vows, the plans she and John made. Now, she was forging a new path, one John would never be part of. Alexander sensed her emotional distance the next time they met. She seemed guarded, speaking less, avoiding eye contact. Worried, he asked if he had done something wrong. She broke down, admitting her confusion and guilt. He listened quietly, letting her tears flow. Only after she finished did he speak. "I know what it's like to feel torn between the past and the present," he said softly. "I still wear Melissa's ring on a chain around my neck sometimes. Does that make me unfaithful if I find comfort in you?" She looked at him through teary eyes, uncertain how to answer. He continued, "I'll never forget Melissa. You'll never forget John. That doesn't mean we have no right to be happy again. This isn't about replacing them. It's about learning to live with our memories and still choosing life." She pressed her lips together, tears slipping down her cheeks. His words rang true, but the pain was deep. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared too," he admitted. They held each other close, feeling the weight of their fears. Emily stirred, letting out a small cry. Clara picked her up, rocking her gently. Alexander watched them, heart brimming with tenderness. In the silence of that moment, he understood that forging a new life after loss required courage to face guilt, fear, and the judgments of others. The next few weeks tested Clara's resolve. She found herself juggling the demands of single motherhood, returning part-time to her job, and managing her grief. She and Alexander continued to grow closer, but they took it slowly. The rumor mill at work buzzed with speculation that the boss had a special relationship with Clara. Some people were supportive, others jealous. Clara tried to ignore the gossip, focusing on her job and her child. Alexander, on the other hand, faced pressure from his board members and certain investors who were uneasy about his personal life blending with corporate affairs. They whispered that he was distracted, that his involvement with an employee could cause a scandal. Alexander brushed them off, making it clear that his personal life was not for public debate. Still, the tension built. One day, a sensational tabloid published a piece implying Clara was a gold digger who snagged the billionaire while pregnant with another man's child. The hateful headline made Clara cry. She feared Alexander's reputation would be tarnished, that people would think she was exploiting him. But Alexander, upon seeing the article, immediately had his legal team issue a statement threatening to sue for defamation if they continued printing lies. He reassured Clara with a calm firmness, telling her not to worry about rumors. Deeply touched by his unwavering support, Clara realized how much he valued her. She also realized that love didn't have to be perfect or easy. It only needed to be real and honest. That evening, she showed up at Alexander's penthouse, unannounced. He opened the door in casual clothes, surprise lighting his face. She smiled shyly, cradling Emily. "I wanted to say thank you," she began, "for everything." He ushered her inside, taking Emily in his arms. "You don't need to thank me." She exhaled, heart pounding. "I do, because no one's ever stood up for me like that. Not since John died." He gazed at her, Emily cooing in his arms. "I'd do it 1,000 times over." Clara took a small step forward. "Alexander, I can't lie to myself anymore. I have feelings for you. I don't know exactly where this will go, but I can't pretend I don't care." His eyes glistened. He carefully passed Emily back to her, and then gently cupped Clara's cheek. "I love you," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I could never say that to anyone else, but I do love you." Clara felt a surge of warmth and fear at the same time. She pressed her forehead against his, tears slipping between them. Emily babbled in her small voice, as if giving her approval. It was a moment that signaled the start of something new, though neither of them was entirely sure what challenges might follow. As Alexander and Clara navigated their new relationship, a twist of fate emerged. A lawsuit was filed against the hospital where Melissa had passed away. Alexander's father, Charles, had initiated it on his son's behalf, claiming medical negligence. He believed the hospital had not provided adequate care. Alexander had never been certain if it was the hospital's fault, but Charles wanted to find closure for the family. The legal process churned up painful memories. Alexander was forced to recount the day Melissa and the baby died, providing details that left him sleepless for nights. Clara, seeing his torment, tried to comfort him, but he withdrew into himself at times, reliving the trauma. The hospital's legal team produced files suggesting that Melissa might have had an undiagnosed medical condition that contributed to her death, something that routine checkups might have missed. Shaken by these revelations, Alexander blamed himself anew. He spiraled into guilt, believing he should have demanded more tests or better care. Clara grew worried, as did Alexander's father. She tried to remind him that no one could have predicted such complications. But a cloud of regret loomed over Alexander, threatening to engulf him. One late night, Clara found him in the nursery that once belonged to Melissa's unborn child. He was sitting on the floor, cradling one of the stuffed animals. He looked up at her, tears glistening. "I failed them," he whispered brokenly. "I don't want to fail you too." Clara's heart broke. She knelt beside him, pulling him into her embrace. "You did not fail them," she said firmly. "Tragedies happen that are beyond our control. You are not at fault." He clung to her, weeping softly. Tell me I can still be a good father figure to Emily, even though I wasn't there for my own." She held him tighter, tears of her own spilling. "You already are, Alexander. She lights up when she sees you. Don't let guilt steal that away." They stayed on the floor for a long time, holding each other, letting the ghosts of the past wash over them. Outside, night stretched on, but inside, they were forging a bond that was deeper than before, shaped by love and shared pain. Over time, Alexander decided to drop the lawsuit. He realized that no legal battle would bring Melissa and the baby back. Charles respected his decision. In the end, Alexander believed that finding peace was more important than seeking blame. With that chapter closing, he focused on building a future with Clara and Emily. He invited them to move into the penthouse, which Clara hesitated to accept. She had grown fond of her modest apartment and was afraid of losing her independence. Alexander listened to her concerns, suggesting they could maintain both places until she felt comfortable. Eventually, though, practicalities won. The penthouse had more space, and Clara liked the idea of Emily having a proper nursery. So, one weekend, they packed up Clara's belongings. Alexander rented a small storage unit for anything she wasn't ready to part with. As they organized the penthouse, they decided to transform the old nursery. They sorted through Melissa's baby items with reverence. Then they repainted the walls in a soft cream color and set up Emily's crib, along with new decorations that fit her personality. The process was emotional. Alexander said a silent goodbye to the nursery he had once prepared for his lost child. Clara acknowledged John's memory by placing a small photo of him next to Emily's crib, so she would know her biological father. And in this bittersweet merging of past and present, their new family space took shape. On the day Clara and Emily officially moved in, Alexander prepared a simple welcome dinner. Candles flickered on the dining table. Emily cooed in a baby swing as soft music played. Clara looked around, overwhelmed by how different her life was from a year ago. She felt a small pang of sadness, thinking of John, but also a grateful warmth for Alexander. When she sat down at the table, Alexander placed his hand over hers. "Welcome home," he said, a tender smile on his face. She squeezed his hand, tears threatening to fall. "It feels like home," she admitted. Over the following months, Clara watched as Alexander juggled corporate responsibilities with fatherly duties. He would rise early for international calls, then make goofy faces at Emily to make her giggle. Evenings often found them cooking simple meals together, then relaxing on the couch as Emily dozed off in one of their arms. The domestic peace stood in stark contrast to the public perception of Alexander Pierce as a ruthless billionaire. Sometimes, Alexander questioned if he deserved such happiness, but Clara reassured him that everyone deserved a second chance at love and family. She, too, battled doubts, worrying if John would feel replaced. Yet every time Emily laughed or reached out for Alexander, Clara felt a conviction grow within her. Love wasn't about replacement, it was about addition. The baby had two fathers sown in heaven, and one here on earth to guide her. The outside world continued to buzz with gossip. Tabloids found the story irresistible. Some painted a picture of a fairy tale, but Alexander's publicist worked hard to protect Clara's privacy. The focus gradually shifted back to Alexander's philanthropic efforts. A highlight was the new Hope for Mothers Initiative program, providing job training, daycare services, and financial help for single, widowed, or vulnerable mothers. One afternoon, as they stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new facility, cameras flashed, capturing Alexander and Clara together. Emily was in Clara's arms, wide-eyed at all the commotion. Alexander spoke to the reporters, dedicating the center to the memory of Melissa Pierce, and John Evange's voice trembling slightly as he mentioned both names. Clara was deeply moved that he honored John as part of this new beginning. It was a powerful statement of acceptance. Their lost loved ones had a place in their shared story. Just when life seemed to settle into a hopeful rhythm, a sudden crisis struck. Clara collapsed one morning while feeding Emily. She grew dizzy, lost her balance, and blacked out. By the time Alexander reached her, she was unconscious on the kitchen floor. He panicked, dialing emergency services, his heart hammering in terror. At the hospital, doctors ran a flurry of tests. Alexander paced the hallway, memory flashing to the night he lost Melissa. The sense of déjà vu was unbearable. He prayed silently, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. Emily, now nearly 8 months old, was cared for by Helena in the waiting room. She whimpered, sensing the tension. After hours of uncertainty, a doctor emerged, explaining that Clara had severe anemia and exhaustion. She was also dealing with an underlying infection that had gone unnoticed. The doctor assured him that while her condition was serious, it was treatable with proper care and medication. Alexander breathed a shaky sigh of relief. She wasn't in mortal danger, but the fear had shaken him to his core. He sat by Clara's bedside, holding her hand as she slowly regained consciousness. Her face was pale, and her eyes fluttered open with confusion. "Alexander?" she mumbled weakly. "I'm here," he said, tears slipping down his cheeks. "You're going to be okay. Please don't scare me like that again." She tried to smile, but tears filled her eyes as well. "I'm sorry." In the days that followed, Clara stayed in the hospital while doctors stabilized her condition. Alexander barely left her side, taking care of Emily in between visits. He brought Clara her favorite meals, read to her, and held her hand through each IV drip. The memory of losing Melissa weighed heavily on him. He was determined not to lose Clara too. Clara spent a week in the hospital recovering. During that time, Alexander's love and dedication shone through in every act of care. He pampered her with softness she had never known, proving that he wanted a future with her. By the time she was discharged, she felt stronger both physically and emotionally. One evening, after she had settled back into the penthouse, Alexander asked her to join him on the rooftop terrace. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. A soft breeze rustled Clara's hair. She breathed in the fresh air, Emily asleep downstairs with Helena. Alexander took Clara's hands, guiding her to a small table set with candles and flowers. Her heart thumped. She had a feeling this was more than a simple dinner. Alexander gazed into her eyes, his voice trembling with emotion. "Clara," he began, "these past months have shown me a kind of love and family I never thought I'd have again. You've given me a reason to smile and hope. I love you, and I love Emily, as if she were my own." He paused, swallowing. "I know we both have scars, and we'll never forget John or Melissa. They're part of our story, but I want to spend the rest of my life building a new story with you, one that honors the past, but also embraces the future." Then he lowered himself onto one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. Clara clasped her hand to her mouth, tears already forming. "Will you marry me?" he asked, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. Clara's breath caught. Her heart pounded as she thought of John, remembered his face, his laughter. But she also saw Alexander, kneeling before her, his eyes filled with genuine love. Slowly, she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will." Alexander rose, slipping the ring on her finger. He embraced her. They were two wounded souls, choosing love again despite heartbreak, and it felt right. News of the engagement spread quickly among friends and co-workers. The wedding was planned for a few months later, giving Clara time to fully recover and to prepare. They decided on a modest ceremony in a garden, not wanting to overshadow the sacredness of the moment with too much glamour. Family and friends were invited, including John's mother, who blessed the union with a surprising warmth. "John would want you to be happy," she told Clara, hugging her tight. Clara's tears fell on the older woman's shoulder, gratitude overflowing. When the day arrived, the sun shone brightly, birds singing in the trees. Clara wore an ivory gown, simple and graceful. Alexander stood at the altar, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression nervous yet radiant. Emily, in a tiny white dress, was carried down the aisle by Helena, drawing soft laughter from the guests. During the ceremony, Alexander and Clara included a tribute to John and Melissa, lighting 2 candles in their memory. It was a moment of deep reflection, acknowledging the ones who came before, who shaped them, and whose loss had brought them to this unlikely path of healing together. Vows were exchanged, not with ornate language, but with simple words from the heart. Alexander promised to protect Clara and Emily, to love and respect them. Clara promised to stand beside him, through storms and sunshine. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander lifted Clara's veil and kissed her. Applause, cheers, and a few tears of joy erupted among the guests. The reception was intimate, with close friends and family sharing dinner under twinkling fairy lights. Speeches were made, toasts proposed. Charles, Alexander's father, welcomed Clara with warmth. John's mother expressed her gratitude to Alexander for caring for her grandson's child, calling him a blessing she never expected. Clara beamed at Alexander, emotion welling up in her chest. Later that night, Alexander stole a moment alone with Clara, guiding her to a bench beneath an old oak tree adorned with small lanterns. Emily was sleeping peacefully in a stroller nearby, watched by a doting guest. Alexander and Clara sat, hand in hand, absorbing the sounds of laughter and music in the distance. "I can't believe we're here," Clara whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. He kissed her hair gently. "I never thought I'd find love again, but you showed me it's possible." She laced her fingers through his, gazing at the gold band on her ring finger. "Thank you for loving me, flaws, grief, and all." He smiled softly. "We're both works in progress, but that's okay. We'll grow together." They leaned in for a tender kiss, their hearts full. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, and in the flickering glow of lanterns, they felt at peace. They knew life wouldn't always be smooth. Grief had a way of reappearing on birthdays, anniversaries, and random quiet moments. Yet they had each other, and they had Emily, a living testament that life could emerge from sorrow. As they returned to the celebration, hands still entwined, they looked forward to a future shaped by compassion, resilience, and love. In marrying each other, they weren't erasing the memory of John or Melissa. Rather, they were honoring them by creating a new life infused with gratitude and hope. In the months and years that followed, Alexander and Clara built a life around family and community. Emily grew into a bright-eyed toddler who adored both her parents. She recognized pictures of John and Melissa, understanding when she was old enough to grasp the concept that she had two parents in heaven watching over her. On special occasions, they lit candles for John and Melissa, telling Emily stories of their kindness and love. Alexander continued to run his empire, but with a softer touch. He donated more to charitable causes, especially those aimed at helping families in need. Clara took on a leading role in Hope for Mothers, guiding other women through the challenges she had once faced. Their homeance, haunted by loss, was now filled with laughter. The patter of Emily's small feet on marble floors, and the comforting aroma of Clara's home cooking. Every so often, Alexander would feel a pang of sorrow, remembering the hospital corridor where his world collapsed. Clara, too, would dream of John, missing him deeply in certain moments, but they would lean on each other, finding that their love was big enough to hold the memories of those they lost. It was a gentle, healing love, a reminder that from the darkest heartache, new joy can bloom. And so, their story, filled with pain, healing, and finally happiness, stood as proof that broken hearts could mend, and that those who have lost everything can find a new beginning. For Alexander Pierce, the billionaire who had once lost his wife and newborn, and Clara Evans, the widow who discovered she was pregnant after her husband's death, life had come full circle, granting them a shared fate that was at once heartbreaking and beautifully redemptive. Their ending was not perfect, but it was hopeful, and sometimes hope is all the heart needs to find its way home. Hey everyone, thank you so much for all your love and support. It truly means a lot that you take the time to watch my content. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to like and comment. I want to hear from you.